Fiction at its best shows us how to accept and gives us hope. And you can't, like I said, quantify hope, but you can say that hope exists because of writing, the very act of writing, the physical act of writing, as does the idea of resistance or resilience. And of course, this is different for everyone in every different profession and walk of life, but that's what it is for me. And so the challenge to those of us who do live in the world of fiction is how can we push back against the same old, and how can we find new ways to show the world and the future that will convey both realism and hope. And one way, the way that interests me most, is our negotiations with or mediations with the natural world, but also the way in which we tend to separate that world from our world, even though the two worlds are the same, and the same earth systems impact the urban and wilderness alike. And whether altered by humans or not, animals are the ambassadors of nature for most readers. So questions arise the more we think with clarity about animals and the more we learn about animal behavior. Why would a noted science fiction writer tell a story in which a parrot in a cage all its life tells that story only to, in the end, absolve humanity for imprisonment? How can Harper's run without fact-checking against the latest animal behavior studies, a piece claiming only humans can perceive death or mourn? And in fact, this photo of an owl I observed being banded feels more and more like an alien abduction the longer you consider the sophistication and nuance of bird life. Even a seemingly innocuous movie like Terrence Malick's New World creates a kind of propaganda by depicting a past starved of animals, despite accounts from that era of sheer numbers of wildlife that would, to the modern mind, appear ridiculous if shown on the screen. And this speaks to the phenomenon that each new generation believes that the amount of wildlife they see is how it always was, even though I, at age 51, can tell you that when I was born, we had 3 billion more birds in the US than now. Compounding the problem, the nature of nature and of animals is often relayed clumsily to us or with outright disinformation. On a personal level, I experience a version of this whenever I post images of our neighborhood armadillos. They actually live in our yard right now. I have had to create an armadillo obstacle course with logs to keep them away from some of the things we've planted, but it actually works very well. And it's very entertaining to see them have to do this kind of Olympic event. So every time I post pictures of the armadillos, I get this knee-jerk reaction of they spread leprosy in response, as the first reaction. Never mind that you literally have to pick up an armadillo and rub it all over yourself for this to be a possibility, or that 95% of us are immune to leprosy, or that there is a quick and easy vaccine now, or that it's not even called leprosy anymore. Similarly, whenever I post a photo of a raccoon I've seen in the daytime, I get some variation on a raccoon around in the daytime is rabid, which is also not true. Raccoons are diurnal, but have largely had to become nocturnal in urban areas to avoid humans. So these may sound like insignificant online encounters, but they epitomize how much misinformation exists and what we foundationally sometimes think of with regard to certain animals. And this allows animal lives to be devalued and thus their habitats to also be devalued. And this is then often accompanied by development without thought for our own quality of life or the future of our own communities. So, in part, my latest novel, Dead Astronauts, set in the Borne universe, attempts to grapple with these issues of our relationship to the rest of the world to build on what was backdrop with the foxes in Borne. So it features the viewpoints of a giant fish, a modified fox, moss, which on the face of it is kind of hilariously ridiculous, but actually I think I found a way to make it work, and other non-human life, in an attempt not so much to show what an actual animal mind would write as narrative, but to conceptualize an idea of animal life that does not have human goals or human rhythms to its life. So if I were to write a novel from an actual fox's point of view, they're not very visual creatures. What they are is they react to smell. So it would probably be 500 pages of different smells, and you'd have to interpret what that actually meant in terms of plot. And I actually joked with my publisher about that, and to their credit, they were like, well, I'll take a look at it. I think I've already taxed my publisher's patience quite a bit. And as in Borne, there are moments of humor and hope, and more than just the usual when you think of post-apocalyptic or climate change literature. Because our job, I think, in thinking about the future isn't, as some think, about creating dystopias, and it's not about words like depressing or hopeless. It's about crucial corrections. It's about making sure that our fiction isn't just responding in opposition to the granularity of the real world, because that granularity, due to our foundational assumptions and the actions of some of our leaders, is currently very crude. So, there should be ways to find joy and moments of beauty, even in desperate situations, because this is a form of truth about the human condition and also, I think, about nature. And with regard to the wilderness and the non-human, it's important to acknowledge what even some astute biologists have, for fear of anthropomorphizing, ignored or cast aside, that the individual animal is an individual personality and mind. So the raccoon that rang our doorbell out of curiosity at 4 a.m, the one hanging from the seed barrel, it's the only raccoon or squirrel to ever breach our bird feeders, and only the once, is a much different raccoon than the youngster pictured, and both are far different from the old matriarch that makes both run up trees upon her approach. The doorbell thing was absolutely hilarious, because we have this weird-ass doorbell that's at waist-high level, not on the door, but on the wall next to the door, and it glows neon at night, blue neon, and so we heard the doorbell ring at 4 a.m, and we're like, we are not answering that. I don't care who or what it is, if there's, we're just, and when we went out in the morning, it had rained the night before, and we saw the muddy footprints going right up to the thing, and it must have just been able to reach and, so I have to admit that I have maybe a little too much anthropomorphizing goodwill towards this animal, just for the fact that it did that. But I also would say that this is the only raccoon out of the ones in our yard or in the ravine that we live on that always notices the trail cam and comes up to it, and usually sometimes gives it a swat with its paw or something. So this is a younger raccoon that was in our yard for a while. You cannot ever know another person's mind. I mean, most writers will admit this. You're doing a facsimile. You know your own mind, but you can't ever inhabit someone else's mind. So you're already kind of doing an approximation there, no matter how much we presume to do so in fiction. And so we can't ever know another animal's mind either, but it's not quite as different from knowing a person's mind as you might imagine, because again, you're making a leap of faith that you're actually getting something right. But in the attempt, we may in storytelling terms come closer to truths about our era, about resistance, and about the world we traveled through. And we may find new ways of expression that transfer easily from the fictional world to the nonfiction, methods of expression that help to convey more powerfully the need to act, the need to change, and that make people more respectful of the life around them. So at one time, the creek bed ran through the bottom of this ravine we live on, and a wealth of animals would have passed through, drawn by water. Now, 30 years later, the creek is gone, only filling up when it rains, in part because they had to put in water pipes and stuff, even though you can't see those at the bottom of the ravine anymore. And over the years, some who live at the top of the ravine have allowed pollutants to degrade the habitat. They've let invasive monoculture plants of no food value to wildlife proliferate, and used pesticides without an idea of what that means to life down in the ravine. Also cutting down a lot of healthy trees that pose no threat to their houses, just out of the idea that that's what you should do. And yet deer still pass through. There are box turtles. The box turtles are remarkable to me because of the ravine. We have box turtles that are 30 years old that have survived because they've never had to cross a road, because their 1 acre they imprint on just happens to be down in the ravine. It's absolutely amazing to me. Armadillos, raccoons, possums. This list is a lot more exotic to people when I give this outside of Florida, let me say. And the books are too, like The Southern Reach, like the first book, which is basically a description of St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge, reads like an alien universe to someone from Brooklyn. And so again, I would just say that, this ravine is also full of fireflies, which is amazing, because fireflies live under the ground, live in the ground the first 2 years, and then only emerge after that. So if you spray anything on the ground, you're basically killing fireflies too. And so the fact that the whole ravine fills up with fireflies in the spring and summer when they're endangered is pretty amazing. And so, nature isn't fragile. That we haven't just wiped it all out is testament to that. And my belief is that we can pretend to live without nature. We can pretend that we can divorce the climate crisis from the subject of biodiversity. But in the end, I'm not sure we're going to survive that separation. And the good news is, the hopeful news, is that we can all aid nature, to the benefit of our own quality of life. You've all heard about the general things that you can do to help save the environment, but one of the most amazing things you can do with even the tiniest bit of property that you control is one of the biggest, to combat the decline of bees, birds, and butterflies. And so what we did, because we had the last little trickle of the Annihilation movie money, is that we went through a vigorous program of removing invasive plant species and planting over 300 native plants. So the scene you're seeing there, that was all nandina, which is a very invasive bush, and air potato, which I think is, I'm not particularly believing in the devil, but after fighting air potato, I now believe in the devil. And things like that. If you're not familiar with air potato, not only is it of the devil, but it makes kudzu look like a cuddly, cute hamster. But anyway, so we've made this half acre and the ravine in general a place of astounding biodiversity in only a year. It's only taken getting those species out, letting the native seed bank recover, and then planting the stuff we planted. And I'm extremely aware I have the privilege of working from home and being out in the yard gardening a few hours a day. But there's a scalability about this. Like, you can literally help by not raking up all your leaves, which is where a lot of the moths and butterflies actually are disguised as leaves as when they're in their cocoons. And also you're providing a lot more food for like warblers when they're coming through and things like that. So you can literally, just by not leaf blowing your entire lawn, but leaving some spots where the leaves are, you can actually help. So you're actually using less effort. You could literally help by not spending any money on your yard at all. If your HOA allows you to. And I would also just mention as an aside, native plants are incredibly important because non-natives, if you don't know, just can't support the same number of insects and birds. So if you have a non-native plant, an exception might be something like an azalea that's been here for 100 years and naturalized, but most non-natives are basically creating a food wasteland for the animals and birds. So just 16 months after we moved in, there are varieties of butterfly that never came to the yard before, caterpillars everywhere, including monarch butterflies. One of the most remarkable things is we discontinued, the prior owners used herbicides and pesticides to the point where I had a whole shed of stuff I had to take down to wherever that place is the county allows you to dispose of hazardous waste, basically. And we discontinued that, and my wife I agreed with her, being a little bit concerned, what about the mosquitoes down the ravine? And we don't have mosquitoes now. The dragonflies and the bats eat them. There'll be an uptick in mosquitoes for a short time, like maybe half a day, and then they all get eaten. There's actually fewer mosquitoes in the ravine than before when everyone was using pesticides and stuff. I did mention to Anne that they're native mosquitoes, which she was like, I don't give a damn if they're native or non-native mosquitoes. But not native mosquitoes, not to be pedantic, carry fewer diseases and they don't bite you quite as harshly. So we have a lot of creatures that are sensitive because they feel pollutants in their skin. So we've had an uptick in all kinds of lizards and frogs. You can actually hurt a frog by picking it up if you're wearing hand sanitizer or hand lotion because they absorb stuff through their skin. And seeing a frog is usually an indicator of a healthy environment for the most part. Unless it's a Cuban tree frog, in which case you have to take drastic measures, but we won't get into that. So, like I said, we undertook this massive project in a short period of time, but on any scale, even the smallest, you can make a positive impact for pollinators. So a guy named Vinod Babu posted this on Twitter, where he created this tiny but useful garden on a balcony in the middle of Atlanta. That's just basically a few wildflowers. So depending on the circumstances, you can help in that way. And if you're not familiar with using native plants or drought-resistant plants and things like that, I'd highly recommend Climatewise Landscaping by Sue Reed and Jenny Steibold. It's really pretty amazing, and like I said, it actually costs less than the stuff you probably do into your yard already if you're not doing this stuff. I would also highly recommend Dr. Doug Talamy's talk March 19th at the Florida A&M University College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences building. He's probably one of the leading world experts on this, and he's coming to Tallahassee, so that's great. So there is also a wider question that I think about as I walk around the yard and observe the animals. And it comes back to the question Borne grapples with in my novel, this issue of whether or not he is a person. Because from the human perspective, it is a very important question. Yes, this is a hummingbird eating watermelon rind in our yard. I still can't believe I got this shot. So how we perceive the organisms around us determines how we value or discard them, as I've been saying. So is this hummingbird a person on some level? Are these denizens of our yard also, in the end, people? Would it be profitable to us as human beings, profitable at the level of empathy, of kindness, of how we think about the world and our own security and future, to think of the animals in the world around us more as people? Would we as humans be more human? What I fear is that if we don't work to restore the natural order, if we turn away from it, is that we will wind up in a future like the world of Borne. Maybe not a giant flying bear, but a ruined city and scrabbling for existence. A biosphere out of balance. And also that if we turn away, we're in a weird way turning away from ourselves and who we are as people. So a lot of those thoughts permeated showing more or less the opposite of North Florida and Tallahassee and Borne. You know what I mean? Because we have a wealth of biodiversity here. But also, speaking about the future and a future with hope, I'd like to return to Borne for a brief reading from a period after Borne has learned to talk and is curious about the world outside, and Rachel doesn't yet want to let him. So they reach a kind of compromise. And then I will take your questions, concerns, issues, whatever it is you'd like to talk about. And I will also sign at that table at some point. Borne and I would race down dim-lit, dust-covered corridors, Borne afraid of colliding, congealing with the wall, and tripping over his own pseudopods, wailing as he laughed, "You're going too fast," or "Why is this fun?" Which just made me laugh, too. When you don't have to run and you have the chance to run for the hell of it, it becomes a strange luxury. Then we'd collapse at the end of the hall, and Borne, in addition to his usual observation that he was hungry and needed a snack, would ask some of his questions. He never stopped asking them, as if he was really ravenous for the answers. "This dust is so dry. Why is dust so dry? Doesn't it need some wet for balance?" "Then it's mud." "What's mud? Wet dirt?" "I haven't seen mud yet." "No, you haven't. Not yet." I would show Borne a photo of a weasel in an old encyclopedia, and he'd point with an extended tentacle and say, "Ooh, long mouse." Which brought me quickly to the idea of teaching Borne to read, except he picked that up on his own. When we played hide and seek, I'd sometimes find him hunched up on the edge of a midden of discarded books, two tentacles extending out from his sides to hold a book, and a single tentacle tipped with light curling down from the top of his head. He would study any number of topics and had no real preferences, his many eyes enthusiastically moving back and forth as he read the pages at a steady clip. I don't believe he needed light or eyes to read, but I know he liked to mimic what he saw me doing. Perhaps he even thought it was polite to seem to need light, to seem to need eyes. But the truth is, I don't really know what he thought or how he thought it, because most of the time I just had his questions. Eventually, I took him to Wick's swimming pool, which was Wick's laboratory. I loved the swimming pool, and perhaps that meant I loved Wick, too, in a way. When the light from the hole in the ceiling was right, it formed green and gold waves, as if the moss and lichen on the surface had mingled with the sun's rays and been transformed. Eel-like things wriggled in the mire of the pool, and the fins of weird fish broke the surface only to submerge again. "What's a swimming pool?" Borne asked. "A place people go into to swim." "But it's full of disgusting things. Disgusting things live in there. Just disgusting. Really disgusting." Disgusting was a word Borne had just picked up and used often. "Well, just leave those disgusting things alone, Borne, even if you are hungry." And I gently slapped away a tentacle he'd begun to inch toward the water. Borne summarized for me. "A swimming pool is a place where people like to swim in disgusting things." "Close enough," I said, chuckling. "You won't be encountering many of those when you're out in the real world." And then I wished I hadn't said it, because I'd acknowledged that this wasn't the real world, that we lived in a bubble of space and time that just wouldn't last. I took him to the balcony out on the cliffs too, but that was a little harder because I felt Borne needed a disguise to be safe. I found a flower hat with just one bullet hole and a brown bloodstain to match. I found a pair of large designer sunglasses. I had the choice of putting him in a blue sheet or a black evening dress that I'd salvaged from a half-buried apartment. The evening dress was moth-eaten and had faded to more of a deep gray, but I chose it because I had nowhere to wear it, and it was several sizes too big for me now. So Borne reconfigured himself to be a little longer and less wide than usual, sucked in his stomach, more or less, and put on this ridiculous outfit. But it wasn't complete enough for him. "What about shoes?" he asked me, and I regretted having gone off on a rant about the value of a good pair of shoes a couple of days before. "You don't need shoes. No one will see your feet." Probably no one would see him, period. "Everyone wears shoes," he said, quoting me. "Simply everyone. You even wear them to bed." It was true. I'd never gotten over having to sleep in the open so often. When you slept in the open in dangerous places, you never took off your shoes in case you needed to take off running. Borne really wanted shoes. He wanted the full ensemble. So I gave him shoes. I gave him my one extra pair, which were really boots, the ones I'd come to the city in. He made a great show of growing foot legs and with his arms reached down to put on his new shoes. He'd muted his skin to a shade that mimicked my own. From the aperture at the top of his head, muffled by the hat, came the words, "We can go now." But if Borne wanted the full ensemble, I wanted the full human. "Not until you grow a mouth," I said, "and a real face." "Uh-oh," he said, because he'd forgotten. In those days, he always said uh-oh when he felt he'd made a mistake. Maybe he was also trying to be a little difficult, a concept he'd been field testing, usually in charming ways. The transformation only took a second. All of his eyes went away, then two popped up where appropriate, and a nose protrusion that looked more like the head of a lizard he had eaten a few hours earlier, and a kind of crazy grinning mouth, in that hat, in the black evening dress, in the boots. We went out on the balcony. Borne pretended he couldn't see through his sunglasses and took them off. His new mouth formed a genuinely surprised O. "It's beautiful," he exclaimed. "It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful." Another new word. The killing thing, the thing I couldn't ever get over, is that it was beautiful. It was so incredibly beautiful, and I'd never seen that before. In the strange, dark sea blue of late afternoon, the river below splashing in lavender and gold, the rock islands and their outcroppings of trees, the river looked amazing. The balcony cliffs in that light took on a luminous, deep color that was almost black but not, almost blue but not. Borne didn't know it was all deadly, poisonous, truly disgusting. Maybe it wasn't to him. Maybe he could have swum in that river and come out unscathed. Maybe, too, I realized right then in that moment that I'd begun to love him. Because he didn't see the world like I saw the world. He didn't see the traps. Because he made me rethink even simple words like disgusting or beautiful. That was the moment I knew I decided to trade my safety for something else. That was the moment. And no matter what happened next, I had crossed over into another place. And the question wasn't who I should trust, but who should trust me. Thank you.